the achievements of the ANC. So I am going to mention the achievements of the ANC for them. And let me start. Achievement number 1, record fuel prices. Achievement number 2, record food prices. Achievement number 3, the highest unemployment rate in the world. The next achievement of the ANC, the highest youth unemployment rate in the world. Record child stunting. And one of the world's worst education systems. And last but not least, state capture. One of the biggest achievements of the ANC over the last decade. None of these were mentioned by the ANC speakers today. And in fact, state capture showed us that the ANC has done something fundamental in terms of transformation. They've transformed an entire political party into a criminal syndicate. That is some kind of record. No other party in the world has achieved that. So these are your real achievements. And I really wish when you came up here that you debated what you have done and achieved in this country. And then you say that you're not oblivious to the cost of living. This is the same government that puts out an incorrect fuel price and fleeced consumers for a week. This is the same government that takes more than half of the cost of a litre of petrol for itself. If you were actually interested in the cost of living, you could have cut the fuel levy today as one of your proposals. So don't give yourself false public platitudes. The rising prices of bread, fuel, and milk, and other basic goods could be arrested if the government wasn't so greedy that it took more than 10 rand per litre of fuel for itself. So, with that said, let me get on to some of my prepared remarks. So, after the most recent GDP numbers and unemployment stats, which showed that the economy contracted by 1.5% as a consequence of the looting and riots in July, and more than 600,000 South Africans lost their jobs, I would have expected a lot more humility from the ANC in these debates, because what we've seen is the ANC policies are not pro-poor, they're just the cause of poverty. Don't forget that. So the order of the day in budget and policy statements is that the ANC spends all its time pandering to the enemies of growth and the enemies of employment in its ranks. Let me repeat that again. The ANC has enemies of growth and enemies of employment in its ranks. And the first, who are they? Should I mention them? It's partly the RET faction. Some of them are sitting here today. Now, the first problem with the MTBPS is that it doesn't offer a clear path to a post-COVID economic recovery. The structural reforms have been dragging, and for example, Spectrum has been dragging for a decade, not because of anything in the country, but because of disagreements in cabinet. And so these minor reforms paper over the cracks. The real structural reforms that would get people into jobs that have been identified by major economic institutions, both locally and internationally, are labor market reform, ease of doing business, and policy certainty. And there was no mention of that in this year's MTBPS. Because these hard choices would offend the enemies of growth and the enemies of employment in the ANC. So they have to be put off again. The second problem is government debt. The reality is that debt now consumes more public finance, healthcare. It consumes more than defense, state security, the justice system, home affairs, arts and culture, and sports and recreation combined. That is a terrible reality for South Africans. And debt service costs will continue to crowd out spending on public services, especially for the poor, with no end in sight. And none of the borrowing over the last decade that caused debt to GDP to balloon was spent on the things that create jobs, which is infrastructure and fixed capital formation. Instead, it was spent on state capture and millionaire managers. And we are now getting closer and closer to a fiscal cliff. And debt to GDP will only stabilize by 2026, because the hard choices have been put off again because of the enemies of growth and the enemies of employment. So we don't have an NTBPS that will actually deal with the problems that we need to be dealt with. We do not have a pro-poor MTBPS because it's vulnerable to not create an economic environment.
Sorry, Honorable Member. Honorable Sibusiso Kumet, kwenze njani manje? Ukeni kingren, orukupa ultimate ya hawasemblief man. Aya, uchahile ilangalga kashoni nokshona. How? Please go ahead. Go ahead, Honorable Member.
Thank you,
that's
Deputy
if we-
Speaker. South Africa is running out of options in its fiscal trajectory, and the longer the ANC sides with the enemies of growth and enemies of employment in its own ranks, nor are the ANC's inwards focused on some sort of unity rather than the needs of citizens, the harsher the electoral consequences will be. And the DA will not be carried along with these policies that are designed to placate ANC factions and not the national interest, and this MTBPS or this adjustment budget. And we will oppose it today because we stand in the national interest. Thank you very much.